do you do? Hi, Tom Buckle.
I'm Carol Medill.
Hey, sure.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
On behalf of the Board of Education of the Wayne Westland Community Schools, I would like to welcome Keith McDonald to this interview for the position of Superintendent. Mr. McDonald is currently the Director of Human Resources for the Livonia Public Schools in Livonia, Michigan. I'd like to take just a few moments to go over what our format will be this evening. This interview is going to take about 90 minutes. There will be 21 questions from the board. Toward the end of the interview, if time permits, we will give you an opportunity to ask questions of the board and make a closing statement. Mr. Silveri, our search consultant, will keep us aware of the time remaining. So audience feedback may be submitted from those in attendance on forms that are located at the lectern. We will collect those forms at the end of the interview, and each member of the board will receive a copy before they leave this evening. Although the task of choosing our next superintendent is the responsibility of the board, we value and consider the input of our stakeholders in this process. So, Mr. McDonald, I'm going to begin with an opening question to you. While we have all had the opportunity to review your application materials, our audience has not. And please briefly describe your background and share what causes you to be interested in this position at this point in your career.
Absolutely, thank you. First, I want to thank the board and the community for giving me the opportunity to discuss my qualifications this evening, as well as my desire to be your next long-serving superintendent. I grew up just a few miles west of here, and professionally, you can say I grew up just 2 miles north of here at Churchill High School. My 3 half-sisters are all graduates of John Glenn. Yes, Mr. Buckley, they know you. As are a couple of my brother-in-laws. They chose to stay in this community, like many do, and raise their families here. And all 13 of my nephews and nieces are products of the Wayne Westland school system. And now we're on to that 3rd generation. And so I've got an opportunity to see firsthand what a Wayne Westland education can do for an individual and to see that future potential that they have. And I think that just within my family, I've been able to see what the mission is of this school district, which is to turn students into future-ready adults. And for me, in order to be a successful educational leader, you have to have a passion for the community, and that's why I mentioned that to you. You haven't seen my name associated with any other superintendent searches, nor will you see it associated with any future superintendent searches. This is where I want to be, and this is where I want to finish off my career. A career that started 25 years ago in coaching, and I've coached for 30 MHSAA seasons. What coaching showed me, though, was the door to education and the rewarding career that it could be. So as I finished off my education at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, my last semester was just north of here at Churchill High School, where I student taught and was immediately then hired there. And for 7 years, I taught students from both the cities of Livonia and Westland, as that is part of the Livonia School District. And I really created the foundation for my administrative career. 7 years in, I became assistant principal at Churchill High School in the scheduling office. And that was a time from 2007 to 2011 that, let's just say, the budget wasn't always that great coming from the state. And those, if you recall, the mid-year cuts, where the state took around $400 away from districts. So right away got into the process of having to make difficult decisions and having difficult conversations with staff when it talked about layoffs mid-year. It's a skill set I guess I've had and some experience I've had that hopefully I don't have to draw on in the future. But should I have it there. After 4 years as an assistant principal at Churchill, I had the opportunity to move down the road to Franklin High School and be the assistant principal of the business office there. So have a different experience working on the more financial side of operating the school system, as well as have an opportunity to work with a different leadership style. Again, at Franklin, I was able to work with students from both the cities of Livonia and Westland. And then from there, after 3 years, became the principal at Churchill High School. When I came back to Churchill, Churchill had experienced a couple student issues that really made social media, and quite honestly the news media as well, in the prior couple years. And I think the image of that school really took a hit. And it's just amazing in this day and age how quickly that can happen. And so coming in, one of my main goals was to restore that image there and get back to what I know we could do well, which was educate students. So we had an increase in our expectations for our students, both behaviorally and academically. And in return, we saw a decrease in a lot of behaviors, as well as an increase in student achievement. And then from there, the last 3 years I've spent at central office, working again as the director of HR. Coming in, I had about 2 months to prepare for going into bargaining with 6 different labor groups. So that was a great experience, and I've now been through 2 different sets of bargaining on the district side, which has been a great experience. And while we had some 2 years and a 3-year sets of contracts, I think building the relationships with the labor groups was probably even more valuable than those contracts were. A couple other areas of key importance in HR for me would be my impact or influence in the area of teacher attraction and retention. Over the last couple years, only about 2% of my teachers have actually resigned, so this doesn't count our retirements, but just resignations, moving to other districts, going on to administration, leaving the profession, staying home with their children. So while it's not zero, I think I still have areas to improve on there, but I still think given the climate of teacher transfers in this area in general in Southeast Michigan, I think that's pretty good. The other main area of focus for me is pupil accounting. So I handle all the analytics regarding pupil accounting, so our enrollment trends, our cohort trend data, our cohort survival rates, our mobility reporting, which is our ins and outs. And then I utilize that for creating our personnel budgets and work with our director of finance on creating the overall budget for personnel, which of course is the majority of your budget within a school system. And then being a member of cabinet, I'm a member of a very high functioning team. And while I have those responsibilities in HR, I'm definitely not isolated into just HR. We have influence and input on just about every aspect of operating a school system. So I'm part of the bond conversations. I'm part of the finance conversations. I'm part of our culture and climate conversations. I'm part of our building our professional development, working with our staff on curriculum instruction. So I've had an opportunity to really grow professionally while being a member of the cabinet over the last 3 years. And I feel my experience, both on the educational side, but on the business side of operating a school district, has prepared me well to be here this evening.
Thank you. Given your familiarity with the Wayne Westland School District, what, in your estimation, are some of the immediate challenges that we have? And will you also address, say, 2 challenges in the future that you think we're going to have to deal with? Right away, I think of 3 or 4 challenges, and I think that most school districts would have them. One is student achievement, and always working to improve student achievement. I don't know any school district that wouldn't identify that as one of their challenge. I think that Wayne Westland has done some good things, especially in the last year, such as adopting Wonders, which is your K-6 curriculum. You know, as an Ed Reports, all green curriculum. Having that viable curriculum for all of your students, that allows for when a student moves from one class to another, or one grade to another, or one building to another within your district, to have that continuity in education. So I think a step in the right direction, but I know, like most districts, especially in this area, we haven't had necessarily the budgets to put towards curriculum. We've been trying to kind of be in survival mode, really, for the last decade or so, decade and a half. So we haven't necessarily made that investment in the curriculum. So finding the money to invest in curriculum, I think, is one area. Another would be the retention and attraction of students. In looking at mobility reports for Wayne County, Wayne Westland sees about 26% of their students that could come to their schools choose other options for education. So figuring out why those students are leaving, is it a neighborhood, or I shouldn't say, excuse me, figuring out why and who are leaving. Is it a particular neighborhood that's leaving? Is it a particular demographic that's leaving? Are they leaving because of scores? Are they leaving because of culture? So finding out what those are, addressing those, and then being able to market into those populations and be able to start bringing those students back. And then the last one I would touch on is always teachers. And I've worked with Jill. Her and I have communicated many times over the years about staff. And I know it's a challenge to hire staff. And I know there's
Act 18 programs that are here, which means that you now have to hire specialized special education staff, and they're very hard to find. So having strategies in place that would be able to help recruit staff to come to the district, I think is vitally important. And then lastly, I would say climate and culture, because to me, climate and culture embodies all three of those. Without a strong climate and culture, you're not going to be able to attract staff, you're not going to be able to retain students, and without the good climate and culture in place, students aren't going to be able to achieve at their max. And then looking forward, I think a couple challenges will be how, and it's again going to face more than just Wayne Westland, how the state responds to the school research collaborative on finance, and whether or not we're going to have an increase in funding to be able to do some of the things that we need to do as districts, in particular working on the SEL side, the social emotional learning, and being able to put supports in place for our students so that they are actually prepared to learn when they come through the doors and sit in our seats. And then another challenge I think will continue to be if new populations of schools pop up. You know, charters aren't necessarily limited, and if additional schools come that will pull from the district, I think that poses a potential challenge as well.
Speaking of collaboration, talk a little bit about how you would get the varied stakeholders in the school district to work collaboratively together in cooperation with one another. And please tell us how your background and your skills would help you accomplish this and have success.
So I think in order to work collaboratively, you have to have pre-established relationships. And so I have a 90-day plan today, and I'll definitely present that to you at the end. But really building relationships, not only on the professional side, but on the personal side as well. And then utilizing those relationships to be able to dig in deep and have a trust when you're digging in deep into data and understanding. And then bringing in stakeholders from all aspects. You have a perspective. Your central office staff will have a perspective. Your parents have a different perspective. Your students have a different perspective. So being able to pull from all of those perspectives will help drive the direction of the district. And then as far as background, I think collaboration is just something that comes naturally for some, and for me, I've always been one to want to collaborate. Even as a teacher in my first couple of years, I wanted to be the one that was leading our PLCs. I find value in working with others because I think you're limiting yourself when you just have your own perspective. So it kind of gets into team building as well. You know, when you're trying to build a high-functioning team, you don't grab people who are mirror images of yourself. You grab people who will challenge your thinking, who have different approaches to solving problems, because I think that that's really how you're able to move forward, is to have those multiple perspectives.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask Dr. Weaver to please ask you questions relative to the district relations.
Good
Dr.
evening.
Weaver?
Good evening, Dr. Weaver.
Maintaining healthy relationships with board and community stakeholders is important to our board. Share with us how you've gone about building and maintaining successful relationships with diverse groups of district stakeholders.
Sure. Throughout my career, I've been able to, see the district from different perspectives, seeing it as a teacher, as an administrator, and now as a central office administrator. And during that time, I'm able to work with different groups of stakeholders. So parent groups at the high school level are different sometimes than parent groups when you bring them together at the district level. And you get different, again, I go back to perspectives, but you get different perspectives when you bring those people in. In order to get to that level, though, you have to have a culture of trust in place. But that culture of trust doesn't exist unless you have open and honest conversations. So hiding away in your office isn't going to build that culture of trust. Being out, being public, being able to build relationships that are going to build upon each other, meaning a relationship one-on-one is great, but if you want to move forward, you have to have that one-on-one relationship start to blossom into team relationships and bringing in those different stakeholders.
Thank you. What are some examples of community activities for which you have provided leadership, and in what ways did they benefit your district?
In my current role, I work a lot with universities. I think that would probably be my primary focus for here. One being Madonna. I've worked with the University of Michigan. I've worked with Wayne State. In fact, I just worked with Wayne State today on working with them on getting some social workers into our district. So, kind of reaching out and being the proactive person in that process. And it kind of goes back to maybe teacher recruiting a little bit here, but I'm working with Madonna right now on bringing a teacher cadet program into our district. So I guess working with university is probably the biggest example. When I was principal, I worked with a lot of businesses around to create a reward system for my teachers. So kind of having them be able to help recognize our teachers, whether they were presenting professional development or doing something for a kid, kind of like a reward kind of idea, and building those relationships with those business partners.
How do you think various stakeholders, parents, community, staff, should be involved in our decision-making and setting direction for our district?
Well, I think you have an opportunity when you build a strategic plan to get input from stakeholders from various groups. And I know you're going to be entering that process very soon. And whether that is survey collection data or bringing people in to talk about certain topics, I think it's easy to bring in perspectives from all stakeholders. It's a matter of getting in front of people and having conversations. Without that, though, you're missing that one perspective. And if you're missing the one perspective, you may miss the whole point. So I guess I would go back to, you just got to build those relationships with those people and bring them in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Weaver. Ms. Hines has some questions relating to political awareness. Ms. Hines?
Yes, thank you for coming in today, Keith.
Thank you.
Equity and excellence are two themes that come up frequently in discussions about K through 12 education. Do we need to make a choice between these issues, or can we do both? Please explain.
Yeah, absolutely. You can definitely do both. So, equity is, to me, is making sure that personal identities, whether that's race, your culture, your socioeconomic background, your sexual orientation, isn't a barrier for your education or an obstacle even for your education. So being able to confront those and identify what those obstacles are, and then having those educators that work with our students be able to address their unconscious biases, then allows for that student to have the opportunity to reach their potential. Without being able to do that, I think then you get obstacles that get put in the way for students' total success.
What are specific ways in which our district should be helping other local districts meet their student achievement goals?
Can you say it one more time? I want to make sure I
Yes.
understood.
What are specific ways in which our district should be helping other local districts meet their student achievement goals?
I think that in this district, given where we are with teaching staff, that we could potentially be partnering with other districts to maximize the teachers that we have. In other words, if there's a small pocket of somebody here that needs like an AP stats teacher, and let's use my district, Livonia, and they need an AP stats teacher, maybe we could split that teacher. Maybe there's a way to share a teacher so that those students could potentially get the value from both. Maybe similar in Act 18 funded programs. Is there a way to share coaches? I know we're kind of getting into coaches now for ASD programs. Is there a way that we could share coaches that can help train and work with our teaching staff so that those students can reach their potential? Maybe it's on the SEL side. Is there a way that we could work together with getting behavior interventionists that can work through multiple districts to help our staffs deal with different types of behaviors, again, helping a student be able to reach their potential.
Thank you. My last question is, what impact do you feel the Every Student Succeeds Act is having on Michigan school districts?
I think it really depends on the school district. I think in some school districts, they were meeting a lot of those standards before that act was put in place. And there was a high level of accountability and achievement already going on. So I don't know that some districts that had a lot of effect on them. Other districts may have been able to utilize that to start to build what they need to do in terms of curriculum and instruction and putting the proper pieces in place so that their students could achieve.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hines. Our treasurer, Mr. Buckaloo.
Thank you.
Questions regarding finances?
Welcome.
Thank you.
So the first question is this. Could you describe, please, your experience with budget development and financial management, including making difficult budget cuts?
Sure. So in my current position, again, I'm in charge of looking at our student enrollment. And from that process, I then get all the way down into each individual school, looking at what we need as far as staffing allocations, and then utilize the staffing allocation needs. And then I go back and work with the finance director on creating our budget for personnel, which in this school district tends to be somewhere between the 80 to 90% of your overall budget is personnel costs. Also work through negotiations. You know, that's a budgetary process as far as trending out longevity costs, looking at costs for insurance and retirement, and making sure that those are accounted for as we're going through that process. Could you please repeat the question? I think there was a part of it that I'm missing here, and I want to make sure I capture
I think you're doing well. It says, describe the experience with budget development and financial management, including making difficult budget cuts.
difficult budget cuts. I knew there was a part there that I was missing. That goes back actually, for me, really early on in my administrative career, back in the 2007, 2011 timeframe when we were going through that budget deficit. I believe it was 2009, we had that like $435 mid-year cut, if I recall correctly, on the dollar amount. That forced us into some really tough decisions mid-year. And that was cutting classes, laying off teachers, cutting programs, and really having to go through a priority process of where do we go? What cuts do we make? You know, what staff are going to be affected by this? And then having a humane process in place with that too, I think is part of it. You just don't make those cuts and say, hey, we're done, we made the decision. But you really have to understand what those cuts mean for our students and for our staff.
Thank you. Second question is, what opportunities do you believe budget limitations present? And in tough financial times, what are your top 3 priorities?
So what do budget limitations present? Is that?
Yes.
Well, I think they present a challenge when you have budget limitations of creating the necessary supports for students. So when you have a budgetary limitation, a lot of times the first thing that go are your added supports. So your behavior interventionist, your tier 2 and tier 3 supports are sometimes often the first things to go. We tend to, at district levels, look at any of the SELs, any of the social emotional learning. So your psychologists, your social workers, you may peer down on those. And so what that ends up doing is creating more barriers for students learning because some of those issues aren't being addressed. And without that social emotional aspect being supported or those tier 2 and tier 3 systems being supported, those students aren't going to be able to see their full potential. And then the second part of that question again, please.
Is what are your top 3 priorities?
So I think top 3 priorities are 1, maintaining staff. 'Cause you have quality staff, and a lot of them will see you through a tough time. So making sure that there's a way that you can set things in place contractually that, yes, you may have to save money, but that we can do so respectfully and make sure we can retain staff in doing so. That you're not cutting into programs that are going to adversely affect students performance-wise. So making sure that your achievement levels remain at the same levels that they are currently, or in an ideal world, still improve. And then three, for me, it's important that a district does not look at outsourcing. I'm a believer in, I know Livonia, we've never considered outsourcing for our drivers or our custodians or our food service. So finding solutions other than eliminating different groups of our workforce in favor of third parties.
Thank you. One final question. What ideas might you explore to obtain additional revenue for the district? And have you had success in obtaining additional funds for your district? And if so, how?
Sure. So additional revenue sources, one would be grants. I know there's a lot of different grants that are always available. I think partnering with universities, it may not be a fiscal resource, but you may be able to partner with different universities to get personnel resources, which if you had to pay for them yourself, turns into a fiscal resource. Looking at utilizing different sites for cell towers and leasing cell towers. I know you're closing a couple schools. I don't know what your plans are for those sites, but if you were looking at leasing or selling any property, it's a one-time revenue source, but it is a source of revenue. Those are the first ones I can think of off the top of my head.
So explore additional revenue for the district and success in obtaining funds for your district.
I've been part of the conversations regarding bonds, so I guess a bond would be another source of revenue for a district. So working with our cabinet team on going out for our seeking fund and for our bond, and then how we would allocate that expense, and then making future plans, so looking at when debt falls off and figuring out the timing of how the debt falls off as to when to go back out to the community to ask for additional bonds in the future, if that's something that is of interest to the district, so that you can do so and time it so that the community or that your residents don't actually see an increase in tax. So as the debt falls off, you add in the new bond and keep it so that the mills remain the same.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Buckaloo. Now I'd like to recognize Mrs. Madell, who has some questions regarding instruction and curriculum. Mrs. Madell?
Hi, I'm Carol. Can I call you Keith?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
You need to be put at ease because I can feel the tension rising. To let you know, I also have an extensive background in education. That's where I came from, and am still educating myself. But I know you've talked a little bit about your experience as an administrator and a teacher in that, but I'm going to need you to dig a little deeper on this one. What experience and success have you had in closing the achievement gap based on economic opportunities and other demographic factors?
Sure. You're right, dig a little deeper. As principal, I noticed that we had an achievement gap. I think almost every school out there can say they have an achievement gap someplace. And so one of the things we did was we really analyzed the data, and then we decided to move away from doing B-level classes. So at one point we were tracking, we had multiple different tracks. There's enough research out there to show that tracking does not work. If you don't have students being challenged in class, they're not going to be able to reach their full potential and to reach that next level. So we started to put in place how we were going to eliminate tracking and what plans do we need, what did our teachers need, how were they going to feel that they needed to be, what did they need to have as far as professional development to feel that they were going to be successful in the classroom with the students. And then we made a commitment to look at the way we allocated staff, where our B-level classes would have had lower amounts of students in them than our general education student, or not general education, but our college, what we call our college track students. What we did was we maintained the same level of staffing so that we were able to lower all the college track classes by 2 or 3 students to help help the teachers in those courses.
Thank you. Please give us some examples of educational change or reform that you've initiated in your current or previous positions that have led to improvements in student learning. I
Okay.
think you addressed some of.
Yeah, I'll go to one that I've done more recently in my current position, and this may be a little bit of a longer answer, but I'll get to how it really affects student learning near the end. When I came into HR, one thing that I wanted to change immediately was the way we utilize student growth data in our evaluation process. The way we had set it up, we used iReady data we used F&P data at our elementary level, which kind of took away from the purpose of utilizing F&P and turning it into a part of the evaluation. And then at the secondary level, we used common assessments, but in the way we scored them was we used a building average for a particular common assessment, and if you were above it, you were highly effective. If you weren't, you were effective. And if you were too far below the average, you were minimally effective. That does not set up well for being collaborative within a particular department. So, in other words, I needed you to not teach so well and your kids to not do so well so that I looked better. So, what I did was I pulled together with my chief academic officer, and we got 80 teachers involved in restructuring how our student growth data would look. And we used the student growth data to help our teachers identify areas that they wanted to improve upon. So what this did was start to build on the collaboration amongst our staff. It helps in the student achievement aspect in that it allows our teachers to now identify an area that they didn't feel that maybe they were excelling in as a teacher, and then they can just focus on that area as opposed to looking at this huge assessment and going, I don't know where to go, I don't even know where to begin. So there was kind of a two-pronged piece to that. My teachers got better, our students get better. The other outcome of that is, over the last couple years, we've been utilizing professional learning communities within our district, and we're really ramping that up. In fact, we're sending, using Title II funds this year, we're sending all of our administrators and a couple teachers from each of our buildings to Solution Trees training. And so before, when we didn't have a collaborative atmosphere of sharing amongst our teachers, with the new student growth data model, we've now created a collaborative atmosphere because all teachers can work together on this because I'm no longer reliant on you not doing well for me to look good. And so now our PLCs are in a position to be more effective. And if our PLCs can be effective, that's also going to lead to increased student learning.
Thank you. All right, this is a goodie. How would you meet the needs of college readiness while also providing high-quality, relevant, skilled trades and career-focused opportunities for students?
Sure. First off, I think these two high schools, Wayne Memorial and John Glenn, are big enough to do both. I think that gets a little bit challenging when you get into a smaller school district, but with the vast offerings that you can offer, you can really do both. And I know the Career Center here, I think it's very similar to the Career Center we have in Livonia, and we're able to offer programs there that are intriguing to not only skilled trades, but also college-bound students as well, such as like an engineering type of course or a digital media type of course, something that kind of lends more toward going into college as opposed to going into a skilled trade. What you have here is immense as far as the offerings go. I mean, welding, HVAC. I mean, you don't see those across the state in a lot of career centers. They're hard to find staffing for, and they're hard to fill. And you're able to do that very successfully. Anytime you can, to me, build on the Career Center, I think you're doing a great thing. I think over the course of the last couple of decades, we've had too much of a push that all students need to go to a four-year university, and I don't find that to be true. When I talked earlier about my nephews and nieces and my brother-in-laws and my sisters and coming through here, they may not have some of them have had the opportunities and gone through the Career Center here, And so I see that skilled trade side in my own family, but I also see the side on the university side, and, you know, some of my nephews and nieces are teachers, they're, you know, salesmen, and they're in operations every day, working with doctors. I mean, there's such a range of what a student can go into in the future.
Thank you very much, Keith.
Thank you, Mrs. Madell. I'd now like to recognize Mrs. Walker, who has some questions concerning leadership attributes.
Thank you,
Mrs. Walker.
Thank you, President Cox. Hello, good evening, Mr. McDonald. How are
Thank
you?
you. I'm very good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. What is the most difficult situation that you have had to deal with in your educational career, and how was it resolved?
I can think of a couple difficult situations. You know, having issues between two staff members and having to work through that. You know, that creates challenges even within your own building, and really eats at the culture. But one I think kind of jumps out, and it's kind of tangential to my educational experiences, but you may remember it even from your side on the board. About 5 years ago now, the KLAA kind of started to dissolve. And when a group of schools chose to leave the KLAA, I ended up becoming the president and having to lead through that mess, if you will, at that time, and trying to work with superintendents and athletic directors and principals to try to unify and create a league that was really kind of starting to dissolve on us. I found that to be a very difficult situation. We had one school who was pretty far away in Grand Blanc, and having to have honest conversations with them that, you know, part of some of the school districts on our side of the league have concerns about traveling up there on a daily basis. And that played out in the papers. And, you know, it wasn't easy, but it was something that I felt was the right thing to do at the time. And, you know, had the support of the superintendents from this area to be able to go forth and creating our own league.
What are the key elements needed to establish and maintain a healthy and highly effective working relationship between you and our board?
So to me, it's an honest, open conversation, being reachable, being genuine, being transparent, making sure that I have a relationship with each one of you, that we are talking regularly. You know, as president, that, you know, President Cox and I are meeting on a regular basis. That, you know, given your different roles in your committees, that we're working through any issue that comes up, that I'm keeping you informed. I think as a superintendent, part of my job is to make sure when you go out to the different sites that you look good. So what I mean by that is I need to make sure you know what's going on in our schools, that you know, the successes that we're having, the challenges that we're having, so that when you walk through a door, you can kind of know what to expect, so that you're not surprised by a staff member or a parent coming up to you and saying, hey, did you know? I want you to be able to say, yes, I know, we're working on this. So I think, you know, just maintaining those open lines of communication is vitally important.
Thank you. My last question for you is, given your research of our district, what do you believe our vision for the future should be, and how might you inspire and engage the entire district in pursuing that vision?
Wow. I guess my first thing would be to put out a vision of one person isn't going to inspire or move people forward. The vision has to be something that is collectively built. I could have a vision, but then that's my vision, and I can try to, as best I can, to bring people forward. But I think it goes back to what was asked earlier about how do you bring in stakeholders. When you're talking about the vision of a district, you have to bring in stakeholders. So personally, yes, my vision would be that we continue to improve upon what legacy is already established, that we create students that are future ready, that are respectful, that are ready to face the real world. And I think what your vision is right now, it speaks to a lot of what you would want to see moving forward. I just don't believe, though, that one person can get up and write a statement and say, this is now our vision, because that doesn't have that collective buy-in.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Walker. Mr. McDonald, now, Mr. Neal has is able to ask you questions about staff and personnel, so you should be acing these.
I hope so. A lot of pressure now.
All right, Mr. McDonald, can you describe your most successful experience in building a high-performing work team?
Yeah, sure, I can do that. Churchill High School, my second year, I had 2 administrators leave. And so we had the opportunity then to go and find 2 new assistant principals to come work. And when you're bringing in an assistant principal, you're generally bringing in somebody that's green, somebody who's never been an administrator before. So really going through that interview process, digging into what people's qualities were, what their attributes were, what they were going to be able to bring to the table. And I go back to what I said earlier about building a team, finding people who were not mere images. So we were able to put together a team that we think differently, yet we completely respect each other. And so to me, that was a real high-functioning school leadership team.
How would the president of your teachers' union describe you?
She would say that I'm a person of integrity, that I'm honest, I'm open, that we have conversations. Generally speaking, we have more conversations. We may start a conversation with an email, but I think the 2 of us would agree that we'd both rather pick up the phone. And we have an actual personal conversation during that phone call, as well as we actually get to what the issue is at hand. I think too often, when you try to work through email, it doesn't come across the way you intend it to come across. People read in tone that you didn't intend to put in there. That's not the way you want to work within labor relations. I don't want there to be any indication that you thought there was tone, so we would much rather pick up the phone and have that conversation. I think that they would say, I'm responsive. You know, if there's an issue, I want to know what it is. I listen because I want to understand, not because I want to respond.
Okay, good. And my last question, what would you suggest in terms of a comprehensive professional development plan for our educators? Specifically, what would the key priority area as well as the delivery system be?
You can go in a number of different directions with professional development. I think there's 3, to me right now, in education, there's 3 areas that you can look at. One is student achievement, one is the social emotional learning, and one is climate and culture. In all regards, and I'll just pick climate and culture here, you have to create a plan that isn't a drive-by. In other words, having teachers sit in for a 3 or 6 hour professional development in August is not going to translate into something that's taking place in the classroom in March. There has to be a connectiveness, and there has to be, like you said, a comprehensive plan. You may roll it out in August. How are you coming back to it in September? How are you coming back to it in November? How are you coming back to it in February, April? How are you wrapping up the year with it? It has to be an ongoing process. So again, if it's climate and culture, maybe you're making a commitment to somebody like Jimmy Casas, who's the author of Culturizing. He's coming in and he's doing a great presentation, and he is the one that kind of gets everybody ready to go. But then what's the next step? When's the next time people are going to hear about that? What's going on in the buildings? How's that translating into the classrooms? And building in those supports and that process all along the way.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Neal. At the beginning of this process, Mr. McDonald, I said that if we had some time, I'd allow you to ask some questions of the board. Do you have any questions that you'd like to ask of the board?
I do not have any questions for you this evening. I'll let you guys off the hook.
All right. Do you have any statement that you'd like to make
I
in
do.
closing?
I do.
Please do.
First, I want to thank my wife and mother of my 2 children. I know she's in the room someplace. I have no idea where. There she is. You know, she's extremely supportive in all aspects of my career, and just couldn't couldn't be more blessed to have her by my side. And then, as you know, this is March. March is reading month. So in this bag, I have some reading material for you. Okay? So if we get an
You're taking
opportunity to
a
see
risk.
each other again in a couple weeks, I may ask you, see if you've read it, done your homework. In here, typical stuff, you'll see my cover letter and my resume. I'm assuming you've probably already seen that and read through that. But I've also added in some letters of recommendation, some additional references as well if you wish to contact, and my 90-day transition plan. In my 90-day transition plan, you're going to see 3 different phases. Phase 1 is all about building relationships. And for me, again, that's not just on the professional side, but that's personal and professional, because that creates the foundation for Phase 2, which is seeking to understand. So working with each stakeholder, that's all of you, that's these people behind me as well, and finding out what it is that challenges that the district is facing, what are the successes the district's seeing, what's the vision, what are the obstacles, and then moving that into Phase 3 and starting to plan for the future. And that's a collaborative effort amongst all of us. And that's part 2021, what are we going to be doing next year? But that's also part building that strategic plan, building that 5-year plan out and the process that would entail. And I've tried to capture that a little bit. I didn't go too in depth on it, but a little bit there on the last page or the last tab. And then in closing, I just want to again thank you all for giving me the opportunity tonight to discuss my qualifications as well as express my interests in being your next long-serving superintendent. And I'd love to have the opportunity to work with each of you to continue to build upon your legacy.
Thank you, sir. We certainly appreciate your time here this evening. We're very fortunate that you came to talk with us.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate it.